we have arranged for 3 panelists to help us navigate this discussion and provide some expert opinions and to help answer any questions any of members of the audience may have. The first member of our panel is Shanozia Kabake. So Shanozia is a financial literacy educator who runs a financial coaching business. She was recently a panelist at the first National Youth Endowment by the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Arts. She was a finalist of the 2021 Youth Financial Contributor Award by the Economics Association of Zambia, or EAZ, and was a panelist at the first ever Youth Summit by the EAZ. She has featured as a contributor in the Our Money, Our Story Zambia magazine and the UK-based Black Ballad magazine. She has also been a guest speaker at numerous events, including recent interviews on ZNBC. Most notably, she has pioneered the #Investors Challenge that has seen over 1,000 Africans take on the call to being investors this year. She is also a Mandela Rhodes Scholar as well as a Bates Trust Scholar. Secondly, we're joined by Dr. Jimmy Mucheche Tere. So Jimmy's focus is on analyzing equities in the healthcare and capital goods industries spanning the UK, EU, and US. The process involves learning about the fundamental strengths and weakness of a business, modeling different scenarios for its prospects, and interviewing management, suppliers, competitors, and customers. He has been a CFA charter holder since 2013, holds a bachelor's degree in medicine and surgery, and a diploma in investment advice, and has experience with applied wealth management, investment management, an investment management certificate, and a corporate finance regulation. And then finally, we're joined by Patience Mupemo. So Patience is an emerging entrepreneur and a content creator on her online platforms, namely on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, that go by the name of Luboto's Diary. Her content is centered on personal finance, business, a godly lifestyle, mental health, and fashion. Recently, she published a book titled Your Money, Your Baby to Nurse, which is a personal finance and business tool ideal for all age groups. She pursued her undergraduate degree in demography and development studies from the University of Zambia and has earned herself other certifications in personal finance and self-development. She is passionate about training emerging young entrepreneurs and people in the line of business at large. So a warm welcome to our panelists, and I would just like to take this opportunity to say now, thank you very much for your time and your generosity in giving your expertise to this event. Okay, with the topic being introduced and the panelists being introduced, I will now just explain the run of show for this event and how we plan for it to go ahead. So for the first 20 minutes, we plan to start with breakout rooms or breakout sessions. So for anyone who hasn't done something like that on Zoom before, the Zoom meeting is going to automatically split into smaller groups where every person is just going to go into an individual room with one of the panelists and an individual moderator. And the goal of this is to try and just create a maybe smaller group where a slightly more diverse conversation, to just try and maybe get a slightly more diverse conversation going in the first 20 minutes. It'll be very much the same as this current room, so there's no pressure to speak or anything along those lines, but hopefully this will just maybe create a little bit more of an engaging start and just get the conversation flowing a little bit quicker. Secondly, for the second portion of 20 minutes, we'll be having a general discussion, so everyone will come back to the main room and we'll have a general discussion with the panelists like for our previous events. And then lastly, we've reserved the last 20 minutes to just be taken for audience questions. However, if anyone in the audience would like to start asking questions, you may do so from now. If you've come prepared with questions, please just you can start immediately. There are a number of ways for you to ask questions. You can put the question publicly in the chat, or you can send it to either Danny or myself on Zoom. Or if you would like to, you can just use the raise hand button at the bottom of the Zoom and then ask a verbal question to our panel. And so with this all in mind, we're now going to try and move on to our breakout rooms. So as I said, you'll all automatically be placed. There's nothing that our audience has to do. But before I do that, I would just like to introduce 2 fellow co-moderators for these breakout rooms. So in the one room will be Dora, who is a 4th year medical student at the University of Zambia. She's currently serving as UNZAMEDSA's publicity and academic secretary while running a business called Afritella. Her interests include writing, entrepreneurship, life science, reading, and self-development. And she is also an author of a book called Blossom, a set of short stories. And then the second co-moderator will be Nomunji. She is currently One Day Africa's communication lead and chief editor of our quarterly newsletter. Nomunji is a medical doctor by profession and is passionate about health promotion. She has had the privilege of presenting her research at local scientific conferences and has featured on several health-related radio talk shows in Lusaka, Zambia. She has recently run an online health series with Rotaract Club called Your Health, Your Wealth. Health aside, Nomunji loves to cook and bake. She identifies as a big-time foodie, and her favorite catchphrase is "Home is where the food is." All right, thank you, everyone. I hope that gives a general introduction to how this is going to play out, and I hope the breakout sessions go well for everyone.
Maybe as we wait for the others to come in the main session, we could allow him to answer the question for the person who asked.
Yeah, Dora. Sorry, I was going to say, Dora, I agree. I think it's a great question. And if you would like to maybe pose it to the entire panel, we can start with that.
Okay, so the person who asked was Precious, and he said, what's the difference between simple interest and compound interest, and which one is safer for a student who doesn't have enough money to invest?
Yeah, so can I answer?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'd actually given a synopsis in the group after you'd left, but it's no problem. So simple interest, you're basically getting a certain percentage of your principal. So if you start with a principal of say $1 and the interest rate is 10%, it means at the end of that period, whether it's a month, a year, whatever, you get $1 back plus interest of 10 cents. Right? And then the following year or the following end of the period, you get your dollar back and another 10 cents, a dollar back and another 10 cents. So the interest remains stable, the same, is always 10 cents going forever and forever. Compound interest is initially you get $1 and 10 cents, but then the following period, you get 10% on the initial principal, which is dollar, and the initial interest is 10 cents. So instead of getting $1.10 in the second period, you then get $1.20, $1.30, $1.40. All right? So it grows. So the difference is in simple interest, your interest doesn't grow, it stays the same. In compound interest, it grows. All right? If that makes sense, let me give you a good example. So there's something called the magic penny. Unfortunately, we can't do a show of hands to see how many people have heard about the magic penny. But the magic penny is kind of like a riddle, right? And it goes like this. If you had a choice between getting $1 million today in cash, $1 million, or 1 penny, or shall we say 1 cent, $1 cent, so one US cent, that doubles every day for the next 30 days, right? So it starts at 1 US cent today, is 2 US cents tomorrow, 4 cents, 8 cents, and so on. Doubles every day for 30 days. Which one would you choose? $1 million in cash or 1 cent that doubles every day for 30 days, all right? Because I haven't got time, I'm not going to let you work it out, but you would be surprised to know that the correct answer is not the $1 million in cash, but the 1 US cent that doubles every day. And you ask the question, why? Because it's compounding, it's working on the principle of compound interest. So if you do the maths, I invite you to go and do it by yourself later when you've got time, or just Google the magic penny. What you will discover is this. So on day 1, you start with 1 cent. On day 2 is 2 cents. Day 3 is 4 cents. Day 4 is 8 cents. Day 5 is 16 cents. It's not looking very clever. But if you keep doubling that money, by day 10, it's $5 US. By day 15, is $163. So halfway through the month, you're at $153 versus $1 million. So it's still not looking very clever. But that 163 doubles to, by day 20, $5,000. By day 25, $167,000. 5 days to go, $167,000 doesn't look clever relative to the $1 million. But by day 29, that 167,000 has doubled to 312,000, 615,000, a million, and by day 29 is 2,684,000, right? That's day 29. By day 30, that 2.6 million doubles to 5.3 million. So if you took the $1 million in cash, you'd end up $4 million poorer. And the difference is compounding. It's compound interest. It's because your money is growing. So you get money and you get more money on that money and more money on that money. So the simple way to think about it is compound interest is like a tree that bears fruit, and that fruit bears its own fruit, and that fruit bears its own fruit. So you start with one tree, bears 2 fruits, and then that splits, and that becomes four trees, and so on and so on. I hope I've answered the question. So it's evident which is the better one to go for, I hope.
You've definitely answered the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Dr. Jimmy. We had one unanswered question from our breakout session with Chanozia. This question was coming from Emmanuel, and Chanozia, we can just pose it to you now. Emmanuel was asking, what comments do you have on unit trusts being investment vehicles? Do they have a better risk profile compared to stocks? We'd like to hear from you, Chanozia.
Yeah, so what I was basically explaining, or part of our discussion, was around how the stock market, while it is a very good opportunity for people, it has quite a high risk because you are investing in businesses, so you're able to experience either the upsides of performance or the downsides of performance, or what the market is performing, and so how the market is performing. And so the question was around unit trusts, if they have that relative, how they rank in terms of risk. So risk, for people who don't understand, is just basically your chances of losing money. And so for the most part, unit trusts are essentially just collective investment schemes, that will basically pool money from different investors and put it into a bunch of different investments, okay? So you could have multiple investments of, let's say, maybe different shares of different companies. You could have bonds, you could have treasury bills, fixed deposits, just different investments within a fund. So from that perspective, a unit trust will relatively have lower risk most times because it's investing into multiple different investments versus the stock market. If you're buying an individual company's stock, that's just one company. So if that company goes up, goes down, you experience the upsides, the downsides of that particular company. Whereas the unit trust, because it could have multiple different companies there, it basically averages the return of the whole portfolio of companies in there. But then obviously what that also means is that because it has lower risk, it means you also likely have lower return, because if you have, let's say, this one company that is performing really, really well on the stock market, you'd get to experience the returns of that company. But then in this unit trust, because there are other companies as well, so even if this one company performed really high, if one company is performing quite meh and the other one is on the downside, it basically averages that, and so your return is average. So yes, unit trusts will have different risk profiles, but for the most part, they will have lower risk than individual company stocks.
Thank you for answering that question so holistically. I've learned so much just from that answer alone. Thank you so much. Over to you, Devon.
All right, can I just add something quickly?
Yeah, please do.
So unit trusts are very important in terms of diversifying risk. So you're pooling assets, as has been said. Now, it depends on where you are in the world, right? In Zimbabwe, for example, real estate is quite a big investment vehicle, but because it requires a massive outlay, one simple way for people who haven't got a lot of money, like students, is to do it through a unit trust. So you've got to bear in mind that you can use some of these pooled investments, whether it's a unit trust structure or investment trust structure. Don't worry about the terms, but where there's a pooling of assets, you can use it to target a specific asset class. And by that I mean whether you want to invest in stocks, whether you want to invest in bonds, in real estate, whether you want to invest in particular themes. So for example, I'm a healthcare equity analyst. So I cover equities or stocks that do with healthcare. So you can say, I want to invest in a theme such as genomic sequencing or gene editing or cancer treatment therapies, whatever it is. And then you have a pool of companies that are doing those kind of things, and you concentrate your fund on that. So if you want to invest and get an income, so real estate-based unit trusts or investment vehicles would be a good way of doing that.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Muchachetere and Shanozia. I think I would like to maybe try and take a slight step back now for our next question. Sorry, just before I move on, please, if anyone would like to ask a question in the chat, please do so. I'm happy to be interrupted on that. But I'll move on to one question. It's a little bit more high level. So I'm curious, both of you have spoken now a little bit about risk profiles and things like that, and the diversity as a principle of minimizing risk. However, there are certain investment principles that are maybe more risky that a doctor might want to pursue. So as a very general question, how risk averse do you think a young medical practitioner should be in their investments, considering the fact that it's probably meant to be a more supplemental income rather than their main source of funding? Can they afford to be more risky with their investments, or should they rather just try to be quite safe as a general principle for investing? Patience, we haven't maybe heard from you in the main room yet, so perhaps we can start with you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think they shouldn't be on the safer side. Like we began discussing in our breakout session, that their medical practitioner doesn't exclude them from being at risk of unemployment, okay? So they are still in the Zambia's young population. So you have to be risky. You have to try as many things as possible, but obviously you have to have the wisdom to ensure that you do background checks of where your money is going, because you should never give out money. You should never give out money with just a view to lose. You know what I mean? I think it's very paramount for you to do checks and balances, but being too safe, playing safe all the time, I don't think you'll get the return that you're looking for. I know I've been risky my whole time. I've lost some money, but I've also had, I have seen the benefits of taking those very crazy steps after calculating. Yeah, so I think once you do your research, you're good to go. Though it's not guaranteed, but at least you're good to go.
Thank you. Shanozia, would you maybe like to go next?
Yeah, Patience and I are friends, so I was just looking at her as she was saying that, she's taken some risks, so I do know that. But yeah, so I think there is, because you are on the younger side, so speaking about it professionally, right? People who are younger are able to stomach more risk if you're thinking of a long-term investment for, let's say, retirement, because you have got a longer period to wait till that time, so you can be able to stomach more risk in theory because you have a longer period of time. But I think just to kind of go in a bit of a different direction, I think at the end of the day, understanding what you're investing towards would decide that for you. So let's say you're trying to retire by 40. I don't know if you guys know, many of you are medical professionals. You should know Ali Abdal. You should follow him on YouTube, right? So he's a YouTuber, but he's a doctor, and he's now resigned as a doctor. But essentially, so it depends. If you want to retire by the time you're 40, for example, that's a very short window. So if the investment vehicles you're thinking of are things like the stock market, that may be a bit too risky to be able to guarantee, like individual stocks, that may be a bit too risky to guarantee that by the time you're 40, you'll be able to hit the specific target you want. Because your 1 million that you wanted to have by 40 could only be worth, let's say, 500,000 by the time you're wanting to retire. So I think if the context of the conversation is you are trying to venture into businesses, right? So you are trying to have a business on the side. So not necessarily things like the stock market. I think you should definitely take that and you should be able to pursue that. But I think at the end of the day, it all just depends on when are you planning on starting to cash out? Because when we're talking about investments in our group, we're focusing on more so long-term investments. And so if you're long-term investments, definitely be more aggressive because you can be able to stomach the risk. If it's more so within the next 5-10 years, I think you may have to pay attention to the type of investment vehicle you're using because not all of them are suitable to actually give you that return when you need to cash out.
Fantastic, thank you. And then Dr. Mucheche, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, and it's fine to just call me Jimmy. It's absolutely fine. So I think I agree with the other panelists. I like to give people homework because I think you will learn more when you go and search it out for yourself. There are two concepts that I want people to learn about. One is the difference between financial capital and human capital. So like the other ladies just said, financial capital is kind of like the money that you have. So when you're a student, it's right at the bottom. And as you become, an SHO, a registrar, consultant, it's going like this, right? And, the x-axis is time. And then on the other side is human capital, which is finite, which is your earning capacity, really. So when you're young, your human capital is very young, is very high. And as you get older and older, you've got fewer and fewer years in which to make money. So it's falling, it's going the other way. And so that's really the first concept you've got to think about is in terms of the capital that I have, me, Jimmy, how much of that is financial, how much of that is human. And a lot of times when we're students, a lot of it is human capital and very little financial capital, right? And it's important because when you're investing, don't just think about investing in the financial capital, think about investing in the human capital. So I want to specialize so that I can increase my earning capacity. I want to continuously learn so that I can do either side hustles, I can do businesses. And Ali Abdal has just been cited, has got a lot of this kind of pieces of advice that can help you to maximize your human capital. Now, this is an important concept because ideally it means that when you're younger and you've got a whole lot more of human capital than financial, you can take more equity risk, you can take higher risk investments because you don't stand to lose that much. You haven't got a lot to lose anyway. And as you get older and you get more of a financial capital and less of the earning power, the ability to recover from big losses falls over time, right? Because you've got less opportunity to make that money. So as your human capital falls, then ideally you should be moving towards less risky investments. The second concept is about risk. Now, so when we talk to clients, we split risk into three buckets, so into three things. So the first one is risk appetite, which tends to be a personality thing. Some people just like to take risks, other people are just more conservative. I would happily jump out of a plane or on a bungee jump. My wife is the complete opposite, right? So that's risk appetite. The second one is the willingness to take risks. So you might have a big risk appetite, but are you really willing to lose it? And then the third one is the ability or the capacity to take risks. Do you have the money to be able to lose? Can you afford to lose it? So you might want to take the risk, but you really can't afford to lose it. So you've got to kind of think of risk using those three lenses and go and read a little bit more about that. And that is ultimately what will determine how much risk you should really be taking. It shouldn't really just be about, I really like this investment. This company is going to change the world. Let me go and buy it. You've got to look at it in those three lenses.
Great, thank you for that to all three of our panelists. I got a question in the chat, which directly to me, which I assume the person wants to then remain anonymous. So the first one that just came through is, what is your advice to young doctors in regards to dealing with society's expectation for doctors to live a sort of lavish lifestyle while at the same time avoiding getting into debt by taking out loans against against them or spending their money in investments. Sorry, I may have read that last bit wrong. But I think, yeah, what is your any advice to young doctors on avoiding, the trappings of having somewhat early success?
Okay, I'll go first on this one. I'll go first on this one. I think it comes down again to one's personality. Some people believe that you live once, so you've got to live your life, as it were. But something we talked about in our breakout room was having a big picture view of the world. Where do I want to be in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, 20 years' time? What do I want to achieve? What are my tangible goals? If you then have those tangible goals and you're working towards them, you've got a plan and you're executing that plan to do your tangible goals, that is fine. Everything else can be done. So say, for example, I want to own a house by the time I'm 30, and the house is going to cost me X amount. And for me to get to X amount, I need to save Y, and I need to do X, Y, and Z. If I'm doing those things and executing, any extra money, I can go and buy a fancy watch, fancy clothes, etc., etc., etc. The other part of my answer would be that, in life, generally speaking, you've got assets and you've got liabilities. Assets are things that bring money in, right? Or at least hold their value and bring money in, something you can trade in the future for more money. Liabilities are things that take money away. And that balance is something, again, that people need to work out. And you've got to have that big picture view of your life and say, what is it that I value? Intentional spending is something we talked about in my breakout room. And then that will give you the mix that you want to have in your life. So again, it'll be a personal thing. What mix do I want to have of assets versus liabilities? A car, for example, can be a liability. In the UK here, for example, it is a liability. The price you pay today is the maximum you'll ever get for that car. Prices go down thereafter, and it comes with costs. Owning a house can be a liability as well. It's not a given that house prices will keep going up, in Zimbabwe perhaps, but owning a house means you've got to maintain it, you've got to pay taxes, etc., etc. So that comes with costs. So you've got to think of things in terms of incoming and outgoings. That determines whether something at the end of whatever period you've set is an asset or a liability. And then you then decide, what mix do I want? Do I want 60% of what everything I own being assets or liabilities? And that, again, tends to be a personal decision.
Great, thank you for that, Jimmy. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next question because I see we only have about 10 minutes left. So the next question in the chat says, I know that for stocks, anyone can begin buying shares, but for things like treasury bills or government bonds, is there a criteria to follow before venturing into investing in them? And that was made public by Shota, I think. Chinozi, I'm curious if, I see you may be unmuted, I'm curious if you would like to start.
Yeah, so as long as you have a bank account in Zambia, you can be able to invest in our government bonds, treasury bills. The minimum requirement for them is 1,000 kwacha. So again, this is the myths that we need to bust, that people think you need like 1 million kwacha, 100,000 kwacha to start investing. Same with the stock market. 100 kwacha, you can get started. With the bond market, it's slightly higher at 1,000 kwacha, but you can get started. All you need to do is be able to contact your commercial bank and they can guide you through the whole process. But even in terms of the Bank of Zambia website, it has a lot of information. You can open your account there and you can actually start buying government securities. So yeah, 1,000 kwacha is the minimum and you only need a bank account and that's it.
Can I just add quickly and say that
of course.
We spoke about unit trusts and pooled investments before. That is a really good way because you tend to need very, very little amount of money to start investing. And the most important thing is not the money you're putting in. The most important thing is to start, and to start as soon as possible. And then the other thing I would say is perhaps one needs to calibrate their expectations. I started an investment club where I tried to help my fellow my family and people that I knew from fellow doctors, etc. But it fell because people had very high expectations. They expected that if you put money in today, you're going to get rich tomorrow. You've got to temper your expectations, calibrate them properly. And then the most important thing is to start now. The second most important thing is to calibrate your expectation. And the third most important thing is to be consistent. Whatever strategy you're doing, be consistent. If you're putting in 1,000 kwacha every month, make sure you stick to that. Pay yourself first and then worry about everyone else later.
Great, thank you for that both. Patience, maybe I would like to just repose the last bit of that question to you here, if you have anything to add on maybe just a more general criteria that students can follow before venturing into those, sorts of government bonds and treasury bill investments.
I actually wanted to comment on the first question that you asked on.
Of course.
I think that the person who asked about how can doctors maintain their finances with in line with how they are expected to spend, sort of. And one prime thing I would like to mention is a content issue. Be content at heart. Don't live off people's expectation. I think it's something that we're discussing in our breakout group. I was talking about an identity issue. Don't live of what people expect you to live, because at the end of the day, you're the only one who faces the consequences of your actions. So be content at heart, in and out of season. You can be a doctor, but things are not well. Your finances are not in order, regardless of your pay. Maybe you're paying out a loan. If I'm dead to people's perceptions, if I don't have the money, I don't have the money. I'm not going to come. So live like that. Like, who cares? Like, you guys, who do you live for? Like, live for you. Don't live for anybody else. That's what I wanted to say. Be content and know yourself. Be unapologetic about your financial stance. Yeah.
Great, thank you for that, Patience. There was another question then in the chat, and I believe this one is directed at Jimmy, and it's by Rue. So they say, it's not often to see doctors venture into finance. What did you do differently, or what was your mindset in regards to finance when you were in medical school that set you apart?
It wasn't anything clever that I did. It was because I graduated from the University of Zimbabwe at a time when we had hyperinflation. And what that means is that inflation was extremely high. So if you went in to sit down for a meal in a restaurant and say the meal was going to cost 500 kwacha, and if you don't pay the 500 kwacha upfront before you have the meal, if you sit down and you eat, and an hour and a half later you say, bill please, that bill might come back and it's now 700 kwacha. That's what it meant. And so everyone was kind of forced to think about the value of money. So on a payday, everyone from the hospital, including patients who were able-bodied, would go and empty their bank accounts, buy the first thing you can find, whether it's a goat, a bag of sugar, some salt, cooking oil, it doesn't matter, something that you can then sell at a later date. So that's what piqued my interest in investments. And initially I started in term loans and bonds, just trying to get a bit more interest ahead of inflation. And then inflation just kept galloping away. So I ended up with stocks. But that didn't really work either, because of the dollarization of the economy, etc. But then what I ended up doing was that it piqued my interest, and I actually thought I might be able to help a lot more people as a doctor, but focusing on the investment side of things. So if I was to help companies with good products, technology solutions for people, help them get funding, they might be able to come up with a medicine for malaria, for example, a vaccine for COVID, that would then help millions of people. So it's still pretty much the same thing I'm doing, but instead of helping one patient at a time, it's helping millions of people at a time. So for example, we are big investors in AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. You may have heard of those companies. They really did a lot of good in terms of their COVID-19 vaccine, and that's the sort of thing I'm doing. But I would say what I didn't have when I was training as a doctor was the financial education. I was very focused on my studies and passing. And then I came out the other side, and then I had to try and find my feet. So I think this session that is being put today is very good in helping people to find their feet. I'm very happy to help. I'd love to give back. So even if you contact me after the session on LinkedIn or whatever, it would be my pleasure to help.
Great, thank you for that. I see, also thank you to Shinozia for being so active in the chat, and I hope everyone is kind of keeping track of that. I did get one more direct message. Oh, okay, a couple of questions are coming through. So maybe we can just do a couple of quick fire questions just to make sure we can get to them, because there's only about 5 minutes left. So Anonymous sent to me, I've been investing in stocks since January, but I am a bit anxious about when I can get returns. I know it might take long, but just give me an idea of time frame, please. I don't know if anyone would like to just do a quick fire answer on that.
Yeah, so there's a big difference between investing and speculating. For more on this, Google a guy called Warren Buffett. There's a lot of stuff he's got on the internet about this. And really, long-term investing, you're using two very powerful forces to generate wealth. Number one is compound interest, which you talked about before. And number two is time, right? And time means a very long time. Don't expect to be rich tomorrow. I mean, if you could get very rich through investing, then I wouldn't be at work right now. Speculating is a different thing. You can get rich very, very quickly. If you bought crypto at $10 and you sold it at 30,000, you got very, very rich quickly, but it's got its pitfalls because crypto has then since fallen off a cliff. So you've got to make that distinction. I have to say. And a quick soundbite would be Warren Buffett is probably the fourth or the fifth richest person in the world. He's currently perhaps 90 or 91 years old. He has made 90% of his wealth. His wealth probably 50 or 60 billion US dollars. He's made 90% of his wealth after his 65th birthday, right? So he's been investing for 45 years and he's only made the bulk of his money after his 65th birthday. And the only reason he's been able to do that is time. So when you're talking about long-term investing, we're not talking about months, days, weeks, or years, we're talking decades, really. And so when you put money in the stock market, that is your long-term fund, You should have a plan for the short-term stuff, but in terms of getting wealthy, you should be thinking in terms of multiple years or decades.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, from my understanding, Warren Buffett really exemplifies the magic penny principle that you described earlier. So that's all very helpful. It's nice to maybe close the circle on that a bit. There's one more, I think, relevant question in the chat before we do closing statements. So Musonda says, in terms of long-term investments, are there any student-friendly options for us to start? Like in terms of bonds or stocks, what would be the best way for medical students to save for such investments? Patience, I think maybe if you wouldn't mind starting, and then anyone else can jump in at the end. But Patience, would you like to go first on this question?
I'm most likely on the business side of things. So I think Chanozia or Dr. are more, they're in the right place to answer such questions. Yeah.
Okay, so I think a good starting point is getting on a budget, right? So the first part of financial management and investing and all of that is actually getting on a budget and telling your money where you want it to go. So if you don't tell your money and stipulate that this percentage, for example, maybe 10% or whatever it is, will always go to investing, then you won't ever put money for it. If you're always going to first spend before you invest, then you won't have anything to remain with at the end of the month. So getting on a budget and actually telling your money where you want it to go. But then after that, then now you need to start tracking your expenses to see where has your money gone and is it actually sticking with that. So there's a lot of financial discipline that comes with that. But at the end of the day, guys, I think the whole idea of what Dr. Jimmy actually said is getting started. So as I've told you, 100 kwacha, 500 kwacha, 1,000 kwacha, many of you can actually be able to save that if you just allocate that. So when you get your money, send that money away. Don't have it in there where you're actually swiping, because you will spend, and then you'll be like, oh, I don't have any money to remain with to invest. So actually set aside the amount of money you want to invest and save, and that is how you actually gain the discipline. So don't just put all your money in one place, actually move it out. So yeah, that's how I would advise you to actually get started with saving and investing.
Yeah, there's something more homework called the FIRE movement, FIRE and this is about being financially independent, retiring early. So she talked about that. I mean, it's quite extreme, you know, trying to retire by the age of 40. But you don't have to, you don't have to retire, but you can take some principles from that. So I would urge people to just check out the FIRE movement and see what it is you can take from that, and you know, you can learn something from that. In terms of what can you invest in today, I think unit trusts, government bonds are a really good way of starting. You know, safe investments that you don't have to worry about, you don't have to think about, because you need to really focus on your studies, pass that exam, because that human capital is very, very important.
All right. Great, thank you, everyone. And I see we're on time, so if we don't mind going maybe just 5 minutes over, I'd like to give each of the panelists a chance to just make any closing statements, maybe bring up any short points on something we may have missed, or maybe just provide any more homework or more information for the students to think about as they go forward. So maybe Shinoja, would you like to start with your any closing statements?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in my breakout room, but I think it's something that people need to hear, especially when they're young, right? So I always like to give this example that if a person decides to think, you know what, I'll only start my life when I'm older, I'll only start thinking of these money investing things when I'm older, what they don't realize is that time is the best asset that you have when it comes to investing. So 500 kwacha per month. If you started at the age of 25 investing that in our Zambian investments, so this is the average of all our investments in Zambia, 500 kwacha per month, if you're aiming for, let's say, normal retirement age of 55, you would have 7 million kwacha. But should you decide to wait 10 years and say, I'll only start these things when I'm older and married and have kids, when it's actually even harder to do these things because you have so many responsibilities. But let's say you started at 35 to 55, that same 500 kwacha would end up with only 1 million kwacha. So 10 years late costs 6 million kwacha in Zambia. And so you need to start thinking of actually maximizing on what you have, which is time. So yes, as what Dr. Jimmy said, you don't have all the money in the world to be able to invest maybe, let's say 10,000, 100,000, but 500 kwacha goes a very long way to actually helping you to be able to retire comfortably when you're now done with your medical practice and all that. So please, get started now. Do not delay and do not think you will start when you have more money. If you can't start with the little you have, when you have more money, you have more responsibilities, you have more cars to buy and more things that you want to show off over. So if you can't start with your 1,000 kwacha today, you won't be able to start when you have 10,000 kwacha tomorrow. Those would be my closing statements.
Great, thank you. Patience, yeah, please, I see you unmuted. Please, can you go next?
Okay, so I would like to re-echo what I said in our group. Make sure you're clear about your purpose, your identity. You know, I said that don't tie your purpose, your identity to just your qualifications. That's being a doctor. There's more you can do with your life. You are not just created to become a doctor. Some of you have abandoned a lot of gifts and talents ever since you started pursuing this career, but you have to be aware for you to be given the gifts and talents that you have. There is grace for you to actually also work in other things that you have within you. So never neglect the things that you have within you, because it's through those things that money can actually come, right? So ensure you do not neglect the other things, because trust me, if you are to pursue certain things, you would find that this paper that you're actually pursuing, going to spend 7 years for, you're not even going to use it. If you're actually very serious, it's going to bring you before great men. A gift of man brings him before great men. It can bring you a lot of money. So never neglect the baking businesses, the smallest of things. Farming, don't look, no, I'm a doctor, I'm what? No. You're actually sitting on something that can actually bring you more money. There's a lot of competition out here. I'm sure you now know that there's actual competition even in this field. So make sure you do not neglect those things. Dora, I know you make those, I don't know if they're called crunches. Continue doing it. You never know where it will take you. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I like both points on time is your most important asset that everyone has in side hustles. Perhaps just a couple of things from me, one of which is homework, which you won't be surprised to know by now. The first thing is you may be worried about student debt and trying to decide what to do with student debt. Now, it depends on the country where you are and what the interest rates are. But, you've got to look at it again, as a whole picture. If in my investments, I'm getting, let's say, a 10% return, but the interest rate on my student debt is 20%, then you are actually investing by paying off your student debt faster because you're making more savings. Now, I know this is just general information, but the point is compare this paying off the student debt with the interest or the return that you make from investments, and that will help you to decide how quickly to pay off the student debt or not. In some countries, like in the UK, for example, you get to a certain point, age 50 or 60, I think it is, your debt is written off. So there actually isn't an incentive to pay off the debt. So you'd rather take all your extra money and put it into investments and pay the minimum possible. But if your student debt is, the interest rate is so high and you have to pay it off, then it's cheaper to pay off that student debt than to take money and invest in a lower returning asset. That's the first thing. The second thing is there are two books that I would recommend people reading. The first one is called This Is Going to Hurt. This was written by a doctor here in the UK who graduated and shared his experience about transitioning from being a student to becoming a young doctor, a junior doctor, JRMO, and then his life after that. And he talks a lot about the financial implications, having to find someone to live, having to pay for this, having to work so hard while also trying to earn a living, etc., etc. It really rang true to me. So it's a nice, fun, easy read. The guy is now a comedian, so he takes a very comedic approach. So I'd encourage people to go and look for that book. This Is Going to Hurt by Dr. Adam Kay. The last thing is another book, more homework, called The Richest Men in Babylon. Now, this was written a long time ago. And this book, it changed my view in terms of finances. And if I was going to summarize it, I would say it is about compound interest. So it's about this great civilization called Babylon that used to exist many years ago. And there was a slave who used to work there. And then he found out a story about one of the richest, in fact, the richest man in Babylon, and how he got to become the richest man in Babylon. So it's got some very strong founding principles upon which I've tried to live by since then. So I'd recommend. It's a short book, probably 150 pages long. So if you are diving out of anatomy or physiology or medicine, whatever, then you can use that as a way to clear your mind. It is a fascinating read as well. And finally, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed being here.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Yes, Patience.
I just noticed there are people who, there's somebody who asked about business, like how they can manage their business. So I wrote a book for those who did not, for those who didn't know, you can actually reach out to me. This book is very helpful for those who've read it. They have found it very useful. So if you are managing a business or generally want to improve how to manage your personal finances, this book can actually help you a lot. It's only 150 kwacha.
Great, thank you for that, Patience. And I see there's been some requests for the book titles. I'll type them up now in the chat. But just to close out the meeting, close out the discussion, I just want to say thank you again to our panelists. I think this was a wonderful discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope everyone else did as well. So yeah, thank you again for sharing your insight with us for the past hour. And to our attendees, I hope you found this insightful.